All right, let me open up the screen. So these are fairly popular verses when it comes to talking about Satan. So the next 3 weeks or so, we'll kind of focus on this. Today, specifically about Satan and kind of how he began. Next week, we'll probably be focusing on angels, which will then, include the good and the bad. And in what exactly an angel is. So I think I've preached about this before. An angel is not a species. So it's not like, there's humans, cows, dogs, cats, and angels. An angel is a title, all right? The same way police officer or lawyer or plumber, uh, anyone can be an angel, all right? But we'll learn more about that next week, um, and learn the fact that there's actually more than one angel species. There's several types of species that take on that role. Um, what else? Then we'll talk about the actual powers of Satan, right? What he can and what he can't do. So today I'm going to focus more on just like his origin story, if this was a Marvel movie. All right, we'll start off with Jesus. You want to read this one, Sam? Luke 10?
Sorry, I'm just pulling out my notes. Then the 70 returned with joy, saying, Lord, even the demons are subject to us in your name. And he said to them, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven.
All right, so I'll give you context in this verse. Early on in Jesus' ministry, he gathers, he has a bunch of disciples, probably hundreds. He chooses 12, right? The 12 become 12 apostles, and he sends them out first, all right? This is earlier on, Luke probably 8 or so. And then when they return a little while later, he sends 70, all right? So 70 of his disciples go out. And when they come back, they're all like excited, right? They're all happy at the success of what they were able to do. And they're shocked at the fact that when they use the name of Jesus, that they can cast out demons, right? That they can take demons out of people that are possessed, right? To emphasize his authority, Jesus then says, well, listen, I saw Satan fall from heaven, right? I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. So this is kind of an important verse. We're going to get back to this when we go into Isaiah, because we're actually going to focus quite a bit in the Old Testament. But what this tells us right off the bat is, yes, Satan originally is from heaven, all right? Um, we'll learn that he's an angel and so on. But a lot of times, maybe not so much nowadays, popular culture has this idea that Lucifer, different ideas actually, but started off in heaven. But back in the day, this was shocking, right? Because most people just assumed, you know, Satan is from hell and God and his angels are from heaven, right? But here we see that they all start in the same place. They all started up there in heaven. And Jesus saw the day that he was kind of cast out, right? This is why he was cast out. Revelation. We're going to get a lot deeper into Revelation in the future, but this is just a little tidbit here. I'll read this one because it's long. Revelation chapter 12, 7 to 9 says this, and war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought with the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought. But they did not prevail, nor was there a place found for them in heaven any longer. So the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old, called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. All right? There's quite a lot here. One of the first questions that people usually ask is, who in the world is Michael? We'll do a whole study on that, all right? Michael appears, I believe, 8 times in the Bible. And the nice thing is, if you take all 8 times and you take the little bits of things that you learn about Michael in each of those verses, it makes it very clear who Michael is. All right, but there's a lot of ideas. Some people think that Michael is like an archangel. Others believe that he's a covering cherub. Others believe that he's Jesus. Others believe that he's like a general of the angels. The Bible will tell us. That's the nice thing. And it makes it fairly clear who Michael is. All right. The big thing here, though, is the dragon, who in verse 9 makes it very clear that the dragon is the devil and Satan, um, created war in heaven. All right, which makes sense. Heaven is a place of perfection where there's no sin, and Satan having sin, obviously, that's going to cause problems, right? What we also learn is that Satan has his troop of angels. Um, in another verse in Revelation, on another day, we'll learn that he was able to take about a third of the angels. Um, so the nice news is that God has twice as many angels that the devil has. The bad news is that that's still an amazing amount of number that Lucifer was able to kind of convince to join his side, right? So it really does show a lot of his not power, but his prestige and way of speaking, and being able to convince that many angels to turn against God. All right. So there's this war in heaven. God wins. That's the main story. That's the story throughout the whole Bible. But that's like the beginning of the war. All right. So this is like the first battle of the greater war that's still taking place today. He loses the initial battle. Obviously, a sinful being and sinful angels can't stay in heaven, so they're cast out. As it turns out, there's only one planet in the entire universe who also fell, and that's the earth, and that's why he falls to earth. Um, so earth at this point was already a fallen world, which is why Satan then falls here. It's the only place that he can kind of claim as home, because no other place can claim him, right? Because everywhere else in the universe. Yeah, go ahead, Sam.
Okay, this like the timeline here is something that I'm confused about, and I don't think I've ever got the right answer. Like, I feel like some people say that the world was created like because of this thing with Satan as like
Oh,
basically an
okay, yeah, yeah,
incubator
yeah.
for a test, but you're saying that like Adam had already fallen before, like, but then why would there have been a test?
Uh, this war in heaven is the accumulation of um, God putting up with the devil, basically. So there seems to be a time period between when Satan first kind of starts getting these thoughts. Because remember, by the time this war breaks out, he's already convinced a third of the angels, right? He already has this massive troop of angels. You don't do that in one day, right? So obviously, Satan was working for a long time, and it reaches this peak where, okay, it's just war now, right? Like we can't just live with each other anymore. Um, so earlier, so yeah, so Satan um, becomes Satan. Well, we believe that the earth has something to do with it, because there's a verse in the Bible that says, the angels can't create, right? And that probably was what triggered Satan's jealousy. Um, we're stretching a few of the verses there if we're only using the Bible, and so it stretches that, but it seems, anyways, that that's probably connected to his fall. Um, at which point he then tempts Adam and Eve. They fall, and it's probably because of that war breaks out in heaven, right? While Satan was, tricking other angels, that's one thing. They know better. They know God. They're making their choice. Adam and Eve were very naive, right? They were just created beings. They were still developing and learning. And the fact that Satan, drags them down was probably one of those major points that then causes this war to happen, right? This battle to take place. We're speculating, but it seems to be very close to the same time period. All right. But we do know that there has to be at least some sort of time from when Lucifer begins getting these thoughts to then this war actually happening and being cast down to the earth. For the simple fact, the earth almost has to be corrupted at this point. Otherwise, why in the world send Satan to a perfect planet with perfect people? Um, that just seems unfair, right? Why would God send Lucifer and all his evil angels to a planet that's still deciding whether they're going to be, following God or not? So that's why we're kind of assuming that by the time this battle happens, that Earth has already fallen, and therefore is the only place that's available to him.
So are we assuming then that the way that Satan tempted Eve is like can be equivalent in a way to how he would have tried to turn or sway the other worlds? And that was like the tipping point where it's like, okay, the world is now.
Yeah, it was probably easier with the world because again, it's brand new.
Yeah.
They've only had so much time with God, right?
But like
Um,
that's why Satan was there in the first place. Like it wasn't that he was cast down, it was that he was there
he
to
was tempting
yeah.
everyone that he could, right? In the same way that he tempted all the angels and was able to get a third of them. Any other worlds that God created, he obviously probably went there as well, tried his best. But because they were more kind of solidified with God, right? They knew God more by that time, they don't fall. Or at least from everything that we know in the Bible, the earth is the only place that did fall, right? Uh, because he seems to be stuck here. Otherwise, he can jump back and forth between whatever other worlds fell, right? So again, we're taking what we know the Bible teaches and then making a few assumptions there. But but yeah, so for him to be cast down to the earth, it's because the earth was already fallen, right? Um, in the same way that we know this war took a little while because he was able to trick a third of the angels, right? That must have taken a while for that to happen. Um, so that's the main thing, though, is he begins in heaven, he causes a war in heaven, God prevails, and he's cast down to the one planet that also sinned, right? That also kind of moved away from God. Now, the big question is, how in the world did that happen? A lot of people blame God because they said, well, for Satan to be Satan, God created him that way, right? And so that's why it's important. The next verses that we'll be reading. Uh, why did Lucifer, that's his original name, become Satan, right? Why did he become the devil? So let's jump to Ezekiel. Usually we don't read the first parts of these verses, but I want to include it just to explain how the Bible works. You want to read this one, Sam?
Moreover, the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Son of man, take up a lamentation for the king of Tyre, and say to him, Thus says the Lord, you were the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty.
All right. If you take this from a very, very literal standpoint, God is talking about the king of Tyre, all right, which was a nation that was troubling Israel. And so this is kind of God's judgment on the king there, right? Except as we read the next few verses, it's very, very clear that he's talking more than just some human being king, all right? Um, and this is the Bible does this a lot. Um, it has like the double meaning of verses. It does this a lot with Jesus. So there's a lot of verses, we're studying the book of Isaiah, and a lot of verses, makes it sound like they're talking about Israel, for instance, but it's talking about Jesus. The other verse where it says, the virgin shall give birth, and his name shall be Emmanuel. The way that it's written makes it very clear that there was a woman that got pregnant, and so it was kind of like a literal thing, but you can obviously see the connection to Jesus as well. The same thing is happening here, but with the devil. Now, the reason why it works is because the king of Tyre is seen as a tyrant, is seen as like the evil person. And the reason that he's evil is because he's being influenced by the devil. All right. So what God is doing here, he's condemning the king of Tyre, but at the same time he's condemning the power behind the king of Tyre. Does that make sense? So not just the person, but the spirit behind the person, which is Lucifer. That's what we're gonna read here, because these verses are gonna make it very, very clear that this isn't a human. This isn't just a human being, right? We're talking about a much bigger character. What's interesting about verse 12 is you would never put these words on Lucifer or on Satan, right? It says you're the seal of perfection, full of wisdom, perfect in beauty. That's not the image that you think of when you think about the devil, right? Usually he's ugly, he is smart, we'll give him that, but he's definitely not the seal of perfection. The reason why this introduction is important, and what God is actually going to be doing is talking about the transition, so how he was before and then what he became after. Um, these verses make it perfectly clear that when God created Lucifer, he was perfect. All right? He didn't create Lucifer with this little piece of darkness inside of him, right? Which then grew up and took control of his body. The verse makes it very clear that he was the seal of perfection. So out of everything that was perfect, he was like the poster child of perfection. All right? Which is confusing because how in the world does a perfect being go bad? Right? Not just a perfect being, but full of wisdom and perfect in beauty, right? So internally and externally perfect. Um, that's the big question. It's going to give us a kind of an answer, and then we'll go to Isaiah, which will give us another kind of an answer, but it's still kind of a question mark, right? And I don't know. I personally, from all the verses that I've seen in the Bible, there's no other verses that give a clear idea, except the fact that, we're supposed to trust the Bible. If God said that he created Lucifer perfect, then he created Lucifer perfect. And that's that. There's nothing else that we can say to that. Let me read the next part here. So this is a continuation. You were in Eden, the garden of God, very precious stone. Every precious stone was your covering: the sardius, topaz, and diamond, beryl, onyx, and jasper, sapphire, turquoise, and emerald with gold. The workmanship of your timbrels and pipes was prepared for you on the day you were created. All right. Three main things here. Four main things. First one is Ezekiel is making it perfectly clear that Lucifer was there in the Garden of Eden, right? Um, and that he was beautiful. When we read the Genesis story, which we'll get to in the next few weeks, um, it uses the word serpent or snake. That really isn't what that word means, all right? If I'm not mistaken, the word is tanin, which is very rare in the Bible. Basically, it means the great sea beast. Um, it's not a snake. Because of the the curse of God on the serpent, he becomes a snake. All right. But before that curse, he was a different creature. We believe that he actually had wings, that he could fly, very similar, in fact, to a dragon. All right. When you think about what a dragon traditionally looks like, it's a serpent with wings, right? For the main fact that part of the curse is from now on. So this wasn't what happened before, but from now on, um, your belly will be on the sand or some crazy thing like that, right? Which means that he wasn't like that before. He didn't just crawl on the ground before. So that's why we have the idea that he probably had wings or legs or something. Yeah, go ahead, Sam.
That always confused me. I think I was reading that in Genesis like the other day, and it just reminds me of those like folk tales of like the Native Americans or whatever about like how a frog got its long tongue. Like, I just am confused about the purpose behind this curse because it's not like Satan is confined to this body. So
Hmm.
like why curse this body of an animal that is going to just be an animal? Like that has nothing to do with Satan.
It's because of the symbolism of it. In the same way that right in Genesis, we'll actually read that God kills an animal to cover Adam and Eve, and the fact that it's furs. And then the next chapter talks about the sacrifice of the lamb. Um, it really points to the fact that God killed a lamb right in that day as a symbol. It was a way of kind of teaching them that there's a savior and there's this Satan being, right? Um, and then use these animals as kind of this image that you'll keep for the rest of your life, right? Part of the condemnation is, this general fear that humans will have of serpents, um, as a reminder of be afraid of that spirit, that evil spirit that will always be tempting you. God does that quite a bit in the Bible. He'll use a specific image. The Jews especially. There's a lot of laws that confuse people. For instance, don't mix fabrics together. Don't boil a baby goat in its mother's milk. Things like that. Um, all of those are symbolic. All of those are teaching lessons. So the fabric one, for instance, is all about don't interweave yourselves with other nations. Stay pure, right? Don't mix with, in the same way that you don't mix cloths. That's just a reminder of, you know, don't mix with other cultures, don't mix with other the Gentile nations. So they all have this kind of lesson behind it, and the serpent is very much in that vein. The image of the serpent, or the snake or even the dragon is one that the Bible carries right until Revelation. All right.
Right.
So it becomes the image of Lucifer, of Satan. So that's probably why.
That makes sense. And sorry, I just have a second question that's unrelated.
Yep.
I've always read this verse and not thought that it was literally talking about Eden on earth because everything else after the fact makes it sound like heaven and
He's in
makes it
heaven.
sound like,
Yeah.
okay, like because
Um,
it's suggesting that like the things were made for him almost, which that obviously was not the case.
no, no, it just says that, you were there in perfection, right? Like
But like
um,
was prepared for you on the day you were created.
that's the
Oh,
timbrels. That's the timbrels and the pipes. The workmanship of your timbrels and pipes was prepared for you on the day you were created. That's actually talking about his vocal cords. All right, the timbrels and pipes. So, and this doesn't seem. It might be just Lucifer or Satan, but probably all the angels have this ability. Human beings, we have one vocal cord, right? We have one pipe, kind of a thing. We can only make one note at a time. So we're like a trumpet, right? Do 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 do, right? One note at a time. The devil and probably all the other angels are a lot more like a piano. They can play multiple notes at the same time. He can sing in harmony by himself. All right. He actually has multiple vocal cords so that he can sing in harmony. So he's like a one man quartet or choir kind
that's
of a thing.
insane.
Um, and it makes sense because when you read through the Bible, half the time the angels are singing. That's like their pastime. That's all they do. They're constantly singing. So it makes sense that God would give them kind of that, that ability to really, if you're gonna sing, then sing to the maximum, right? But that's what that bottom part is talking about. The timbrels and pipes. That those are specifically like instrument sound musical words that are being used. Um, it's just talking about his perfection, right? His beauty, his ability, and all of those things like that. Um, then it goes here, and this is where it does go to heaven, right? You were the anointed cherub who covers. I established you. You were on the holy mountain of God. You walked back and forth in the midst of the fiery stones. All right, before you ask, I have no idea what the fiery stones are. I think it's like the only time these words appear. Though again, don't think of fire as like the earthly fire. Uh, Fire, especially in heaven, is more of a aspect of like light or power. We'll get more into that when we talk about angels next week, because there's a whole being that's literally on fire. They're the seraphim, the burning ones. Same wording that we're getting here for the fiery stones. The important thing here, and I actually have a little toy here to show it, is this is the little thing that I bought, the Ark of the Covenant. You see it? So this is like the one that Moses built. Um, this is called the mercy seats, right? This is the cap of the Ark of the Covenant. Literally, it represents the throne of God. And then on the thing, you have two angels, which are actually supposed to make like an arch. They're supposed to touch. Um, Everything that Moses created on earth, so the temple, the rooms, and the Ark of the Covenant, is an image of what really exists in heaven. All right. So just as Moses created a temple here on earth, the model was based on the actual temple that exists in heaven. The Ark of the Covenant and the mercy seat represents the throne of God. All right. So you have the mercy seats or the throne of God, which below it is the Ten Commandments. I preached about that a little while ago. And then you have these two angels. These two angels are the covering cherubs. All right. Lucifer or Satan was one of those angels. All right. So he was one of the angels that literally, where God sat in the center of the universe, he was one of the angels that kind of covered God. He created like that, this arch. That's why he called the one who covers. All right. What's interesting about this is we get to learn what kind of an angel Lucifer is. He's a cherub. All right. Next week we'll figure out what that is. But I can give you a small hint now. It is anything but human. It is a creature. All right. It's an actual like animal body parts kind of a thing. In fact, um, the closest thing that you can think of is a sphinx. You know what a sphinx is? Lion body, eagle wings, kind of weird face. A sphinx or even a dragon. All right, but we'll get deeper into that next week. But Lucifer is one of, or was one of these angels. Why is that important? Several things. The first one is it's the closest that you could ever get to God. All right, literally, his job was to stand beside the God of the universe, right? He covered God. It's like the best position, best job that any being, any angel can have. The other thing that's important, and again, we're speculating a little bit here, but as we read the next couple of verses and go into Isaiah, it'll kind of make sense. Imagine the throne. All right. So you have God sitting on his throne. Every day there's angels or beings or whatever that go in his presence. And the second you get to the presence of God, you see this all the time in the Bible. Everyone bows down. It's the first thing you do, right? You bow down, and then God, asks you to stand up and then gives you the message. So every day you have angels and you have creatures bowing down to God. From Satan's point of view, it's very, very similar to them bowing to him because he's literally right beside the throne, right? So day and night, you have these beings that are bowing down to God. And from his perspective, they're basically bowing in his direction as well, right? Um, so it makes sense that at some point he's like, why don't they bow down to me? Like, what's the big difference that's actually between me and God, right? I'm perfect. God Himself says so. He's a seal of perfection. He's the perfection of beauty. He's got this huge amount of wisdom. For Satan to convince a third of the angels, they looked up to him, right? He must have been an angel that they looked up. Just the fact that of his position would have angels looking up to him, right? Um, and so it gives us at least a hint of why it could happen, right? Day and night, these creatures are bowing down, and it's just that thing. Like if they just turned their head just a little bit to the side, it would be me, right? And it feels good. It looks like they're bowing down to me. And so you can imagine how this might. Now we don't know if that's what it is, but it at least is a possibility as to one of the reasons why he had this idea, right? Um, let's read the next verse, which is the downfall now. You were perfect in your ways from the day you were created till iniquity was found in you. All right, and so this is where it flips. Let me go back to the last verse here for a second, or two verses before. Yeah. So if you go back to the whole timbrels and pipes, one of the important things is right at the end. These things was prepared for you on the day you were created. And that is key, all right? Um, the devil, Satan, Lucifer, whatever name you call him, he is a created being, all right? And that's the big difference. God is creator, Satan was created, which should have been enough for him to accept the fact that he can never be like God. But for some reason, right? And we gave a couple of possibilities, but for some reason, he wanted to be more, right? And this is where Earth possibly comes into the story again, because again, the two stories do seem to happen closely together, like we talked about at the beginning. The creation of the world and the fall of the world happens roughly at the same time as the beginning, where this iniquity was found in you, which is that first spark, right? Until the war actually happens. Both events have some sort of overlapping, right? Because at some point Earth falls, which is why then Lucifer is cast down to the earth. If these two stories do overlap, then it's another very strong possibility that when God creates the world, um, Lucifer again is right there, right? He's right beside God. He's really popular with the angels. Maybe possibly the best of the angels. And he comes up with the idea: why can't I help? Let me help with creation, which would therefore also make him creator, right? Now we've talked about this, talking about the Trinity, the fact that God has that ultimate God persona, right? The one that sits on the throne, while Jesus becomes kind of the in between that ultimate image of God and creation, right? If Jesus has always had that role of being kind of like the one that connects with those things that have been created, um, you can see how that might possibly confuse Lucifer, right? Because he looks at Jesus and Jesus isn't that different from him, right? They seem awfully close one to another, even though Jesus is still God and Lucifer is created. But because Jesus doesn't kind of present himself like the Father does, he seems a lot more at our level. That might be another reason why Lucifer kind of gets this idea, right? Like, how big of a difference really is there between Jesus and myself, right? Why can't I help create the same way Jesus does, right? God the Father comes up with the idea, Jesus does it, and Lucifer's like, well, why doesn't God give me, tell me to create something and I'll create it, right? The same way Jesus does. So again, we're speculating a little bit here, but because these two stories, we know that there's some sort of overlap. There's a very strong chance that between being that covering cherub and watching Jesus create the earth, that is kind of a trigger as to why he gets this initial idea, right? Right now, it's just talking in Ezekiel, anyways. It only talks about the fact that iniquity was found in you. All right. It doesn't get into what the actual sin is. When we get to Isaiah, that will. But he is going to give us a few more hints as to why he might have turned. All right. You want to read this one here, Sam?
Yeah. By the abundance of your trading, you became filled with violence within, and you sinned. Therefore, I cast you as a profane thing out of the mountain of God, and I destroyed you, O covering cherub, from the midst of the fiery stones.
All right. Here you can kind of see a little bit of the two images kind of overlapping a little bit, right? Like the beginning is very much connected to the king of Tyre, the idea of the trading and stuff. Tyre, by the way, was a country right by the sea, so it had a very strong trading thing. That's where its wealth came from. So that's what this is coming from. So it's kind of a literal, but then it automatically goes into the spiritual again, right? I cast you out of heaven, things like that. But it probably also is connected to Lucifer. So as the king of Tyre, his main job was, the business going on of the kingdom. If you convert that to Lucifer, his main job was to be this leader of the angels, right? This covering cherub and so on. Because of his position, you became full of yourself and you sinned, right? So you can guess, at least it's not 100%, but you can kind of make that connection. Your job of being king is what caused you to sin. And in Lucifer, if this verse is still being parallel, then it's the same thing. Because of the position you had, you ended up sinning, right? Because you were so close to God, you started thinking more of yourself than you should have, right? Um, it's a possibility. It's not strictly there, but this is us trying to get as much out of the verses as we can. But then it very much goes back into the godly aspect, right? You were cast out as a profane thing, out of the mountain of God. I destroyed you, O covering cherub, from the midst of the fiery stones. Yeah, go ahead, Sam.
I was just gonna clarify, like, I thought that trading meant um uh I don't know exactly, but like his conversations that he's having, like almost like the convincing conversations. Like I thought it was like the bartering back and forth
Okay,
of
that's a
like,
possibility too. Yeah, that would make a good point. I'm When you take it from the literal standpoint, so if we're looking at it from the king of Tyre, trading means the business going on, right? The reasons why it's called trading is because in most cases, money wasn't used, right? It was bartering. So you give me this and I'll give you this. So you give me weapons, I'll give you salt or whatever Tyre was
right.
known for. Um, but that makes sense also with Lucifer, right? Because of you trying to convince the other angels in the other worlds and
Yeah.
stuff like that, you became filled with violence, which is where that war comes from, and you sinned, right? So that's a possibility too. I
Hmm.
actually never saw it that way, but it actually does make sense as well, right? That the trading, not of physical things, but of like ideas and words and so on. Because we know that must have happened, right? Again, for Lucifer to take a third of the angels, he must have talked a lot, right, to
Yeah.
convince them to make those deals. Yeah.
I think that's what Arise defined it as. And
Ah,
it's
okay, okay.
basically like as you keep saying something, the more you believe it.
Yeah,
And then like if you get any positive feedback, you just kind of focus on that and you just
yeah.
build up.
It's actually, now that you're talking about that, this is completely off a tangent now. But there's a study of languages which I thought is really interesting. And what they're finding out is the language you speak actually changes how your brain works. All right. And I'll give you an example. It's an example that they use. There's a certain tribe, I can't remember if it's South America or in Africa, where they don't say like turn left or turn right, go go forward or back. Anytime they talk about a direction, it's north, east, south, or west. All right. So if I was to say, oh, the book is right there on your right, they wouldn't say that. They would say the book's on the south. All right. But because their language is shaped like that, they're one of the few tribes in the world that you can put a blindfold on them and spin them around. They'll always know where north is. It's crazy. Like they've actually done tests with these with this tribe, and just because of how they speak, they literally gain something in their brain that no one else has. All right, so that idea that like exactly like you said, the more you say things, it literally changes what you believe, right? Um, and yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So this idea of trading in terms of words makes complete sense. It actually makes complete sense. I like that idea. I'll add that in to my future studies. I think this is the last one for Ezekiel. Yeah. So let me read the last one here for Ezekiel. This is the last verse. Your heart was lifted up because of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom for the sake of your splendor. I cast you to the ground. I laid you before kings that they might gaze at you. Um, so again, there's this connection to himself, right? To ego. Um, you sinned not because of anything God did, not because of any flaw that God created in you. You sinned because you were perfect. Uh, and instead of appreciating the being that created you, you began to only appreciate the beauty that you had yourself, right? Um, so it's like it's like a master teaching a student, and then the student for some reason thinks that he's amazing because of himself, right? Not understanding, well, no, it's the master that taught you, right? But that's kind of what's happening here. Because he was created so well, so beautiful, so perfect, so smart, instead of appreciating God for that, he started to only look at it in himself, right? And then comparing himself to God and kind of saying, well, what's really the big difference? If I'm perfect and he's perfect, then we're equals, right? You can see how mathematically it kind of makes sense what he's saying, right? Except the perfection of God is completely different than the perfection of anything that's created, right? Um, but I don't know. That's what this verse is saying. That's what I get out of it when I read a verse like this, right? The focus is very much on himself. He created this idea, and again, possibly like you said, Sam, that idea of the words, right? He started to say it until he believed it, right? And then once that happened, that's the iniquity. That's that sin that's kind of sparked inside of him, and and sin enters the universe, right, for the first time. Let's go to Isaiah. Isaiah is a lot more straightforward. And again, it actually mentions his name this time. Um, Ezekiel's a lot more poetic, symbolic kind of a thing. Isaiah is a lot more straightforward. You want to read this one, verse 12?
How you are fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning. How you are cut down to the ground, you who weaken the nations.
All right. Um, so there's a few things here that you may not know. Uh, this verse is very similar to what Jesus said. Remember, I saw Satan fall from heaven. Um, so this is very similar to that. It's because of this verse that we call Satan originally Lucifer, right? This is where that comes from. Um, Here's the thing with that. Lucifer isn't a name. All right. Uh, Lucifer literally means son of the morning. When you hear the word Lucifer, in fact, you can hear the Latin Luciferos, which is son of light, so, or son of the morning. Um, when the Bible was translated from the original Hebrew to like Latin, so the early Christian church, early Catholicism, um, this verse was already taken as this is talking about Satan. All right. And because it's talking about Satan, you get this word, son of the morning, which in Latin is Lucifero, right? And they said that's Satan's name. That's Lucifer's name. It really isn't, all right? And I'll tell you why. Jesus is called Lucifer as well. In Revelation, Jesus is called the son of the morning, all right? It's a title. It's the morning star is really what it is. So if if you get a day where there's no lights outside and you go outside, that first star that you see appear, that's the morning star. That's like the first star. It's the one that kind of starts it all off, right? Um, and Satan is given that role, right? So in the Bible, stars are almost always compared to as angels, right? You always kind of get that comparison. Um, so Lucifer being the morning star is kind of like you were the star of stars, right? You were like number one. You were the first one. Because of your brilliance, you're the first one that appears in the sky. All right. So it's not a name. It's more of like showing his, not even his position, but like his status, right? Like you were the angel of angels. You were the top guy. Um, you were the first one to appear. You were the brightest star, but then you were cut down, right? You know, you were taken out of the sky. That's the imagery that's given here. Um, in Revelation, Jesus is given that status, right? You are the morning star. You are that main light of the universe, right? Um, it goes back to the verses when Jesus is resurrected, and he's called like the first fruits, right? He's like the example of what we're all going to go through. All right. So this is, I'm probably confusing you, but um, this status of the morning, the star, son of the star of the morning, or um, the morning star, it's that symbol of you are like the first. You're the number one. In Jesus's case, when it mentions it in Revelation, it's actually in terms of you are the first of the resurrected. So you're like the first star of the resurrected. And then all the other stars, when they're resurrected, will fill the sky up. All right. So that's actually what this is kind of talking about. It's not a name. The reason why, I don't know if you've ever seen stuff in like TV shows or movies, but a lot of times nowadays there's this idea that Satan and Jesus were brothers. I don't know if you've ever seen that. Popular culture, they comic books, things like that. They like to have that idea. It comes from these kinds of verses. The fact that Lucifer is called the son of the morning, and then Jesus is called the son of the morning. Therefore, they must be brothers, right? They're equals. Except the Bible is very clear that Satan was created and that Jesus is the creator, right? So obviously that's not the case. But because they take a verse like this out of context and they say, well, Lucifer, the name of Satan, is the son of the morning, and then Jesus is called the son of the morning, they're brothers. But again, this isn't a name. This is just a status. This is a way of explaining the position that Lucifer held in heaven. He was the top star. He was the top angel. In Revelation, the imagery is different. It's talking about the resurrection. Jesus is the first of the resurrection. All right. But you can see why people would be confused. But does that make sense? Do you understand?
Yeah, you just answered my clarifying question. It literally just
Okay.
means the first, like the
Yeah, it's like
first.
the first,
Okay.
which is literally what, in physical terms, that's what it is. The first star that appears in the sky is the morning star or the son of the morning. Um, and so both of them kind of had that prestige, right? Satan as that brightest of all the angels, and then Jesus as the first fruits of the resurrected, of the saved. All right, let's jump to verse 13. You want to read that one? Because I've been talking too much.
For you have said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will also sit on the mount of the congregation on the farthest sides of the north.
All right. It's using that same imagery here of that the son of the morning, or that morning star. So he's basically saying, listen, God created you special. You were like the best of all the angels, but for some reason it wasn't enough for you. Not only did you want to be the best of the angels, you actually wanted to be above the angels, right? And that's what it means when it says, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. That stars there is, again, symbolic of angels. So I don't want to just be the top angel. I want to be above the angels. The problem is there's only one person, or one being that's above the angels, and that's God, right? And that's really the direction that he's moving in. The next verse will actually say he wants to put his throne above the throne of God. The fact that he has a throne, right? I'll exalt my throne. He doesn't have a throne. He stands beside the throne, but Lucifer doesn't have a throne. But this is all of these ideas that he's creating, right? Like, why don't I? God the Father has his throne. Jesus has his throne. I'm right beside them. Why don't I get one? Right? All the angels look up to me. I'm the smartest. I'm the most beautiful. Um, I have the biggest position. Then, why don't I get a throne? Why can't I be above the angels? Why can't I tell the angels what to do? So it's those kinds of ideas and emotions that, from all the verses that we've been reading, seems to be kind of what's forming that idea in his head to this, which is the last one we'll read today. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. All right. This really means two things. The first one is very much connected to this. I want to be above the stars. So I don't want to just be an angel. I want to be above the angels, right? So it's a part of status. I want a throne. I want to be above people, and so on. So there's like that physical aspect of it. But the second part is more of the mental side of things. And again, it almost makes sense what he was thinking. If God made me perfect, and we're gonna step into his water for a second here, right? Just don't get lost in it. Um, But look, this is how he thinks. If God made me perfect, if I'm sinless, if I have all this knowledge and perfection, why do I need laws? If I'm perfect, I'm always going to do what's right. Like, I don't need to be told what to do. God already created me to do good, right? You can see how that makes sense, right? Why does God give me laws? I'm perfect. I'm always going to be perfect. Um, where his logic fails is he believes that his perfection is inherent inside of himself. And what the Bible teaches is the perfection actually comes from God. God creates perfection in you. It's not naturally who you are. God elevates you to that perfection. So the second you separate God from that equation, the perfection ceases being perfect, right? Which is exactly what happens to Satan. Because his whole argument is, if I'm perfect, I don't need laws. But look what happened the second he disobeyed God's laws. Everything goes to hell, right? Everything turns bad. Every decision he makes is negative, is bad for the universe, right? And the reason why I'm saying that these laws are important is because it's going to be directly connected to Jesus's purpose of coming down to earth. All right. This battle, the battle that we talked about right at the beginning, in there in Revelation, it's possible that it was a physical battle. It's possible that they were punching each other. Or, I don't know, had swords or who knows what, lasers. Um, but odds are the battle was actually a battle of ideas, of words, right? Almost more like a court case, a battle like in court. God is on one side saying, listen, these are my laws. These are perfect. These are good. And then it's Satan basically saying, I don't need your laws. I'm perfect by myself and I can create my own rules, my own laws. The second you start thinking like that, that's what verse 14 is saying. I will be like the Most High. I will be like God. What makes God unique is that he's the one that decides, right? God the Father is the one that creates the laws, that sets how we live our lives. The second you get to a point where you're like, well, no, I want to make the decisions for my own life. This is my life, this is my body, this is my mind. I'm going to decide how I live my life. The second you do that, you're living verse 14. I don't care what God says. I don't care about God's laws. I'm going to decide what my laws are. And again, when you think that way, it makes perfect sense. Like, say, at no time did Satan, think, oh, I'm going to be evil. I want to be bad. I want to kill people. That's not how Satan started. Satan was sincere in his ideas. He truly believed we don't need God's laws. We're perfect beings. We can make decisions ourselves and still have this perfect life. Um, which then we have the story of the earth, right? That's why the Bible says that the earth is like the the stage kind of a thing. This is where the test happens. Um, it's one of the reasons why God even allows everything that's happening now to happen. It's a way of proving to the universe, to every single living being that exists, this is what happens when you get this idea. When you think that, you don't need to follow my laws, or where you think that you can make up your own laws and make your own decisions. The earth is the example. Let's see what happens, right? Um, and again, most human beings, they don't want to be bad, right? Most human beings, you don't wake up in the morning saying, I'm going to hurt someone, I'm going to ruin someone's life, or what. But it seems to naturally happen, right? We make up our own decisions. We think we're doing something that's good, and it just ends up making things worse, right? That is like the story of our lives. And that's what God is trying to show. He's like, listen, the laws that I give you, the laws that you find in the Bible, especially like the Ten Commandments, the foundational laws, those were created not not to make you into slaves, not to make your lives worse, but to make your lives better. This is how you'll find happiness. This is how you'll find fulfillment and peace and satisfaction in your lives. You can try living a different way. You can try making your own laws, um, but it will always end up badly. It will always end up hurting you and taking away joy. Now, again, I can say this to people, and most people on the earth will disagree with me. And they'll say, nah, you're crazy, right? The Bible's old, the laws are old, we're more advanced now, or more whatever. Um, the world proves it over and over again. The second you go against God's laws, it never works out, right? And we're talking about the precepts here. And we'll get into that one day. when I talk about the precepts, what I'm saying is there's the Ten Commandments. The Ten Commandments are like the foundational laws, all right? Very, very simple, by the way. Think about Canada. Canada literally has like books of law, right? There's literally thousands and thousands and thousands of laws in Canada, from, traffic laws to civil laws, all of that stuff. God is able to create an entire system with 10. All right, with 10 simple laws, he creates an entire system of governance. Now, after the 10 commandments, we get what are called the laws of Moses. All right, I'm jumping ahead here, but what those laws are, and those include all those really weird laws that exist, all of those laws are simply interpretations of how we keep those original 10 precepts. All right, and I'll give you an example. So one of the 10 commandments says, "Thou shalt not kill." Simple. But what does that actually mean? For instance, if you're a soldier, what does that law mean? I mean, your job is to kill, right? And let's face it, the Bible is full of killing and God's people killing, right? David slaughtered thousands, and yet he never broke the 10 commandments. He never broke the "thou shalt not kill," at least not in that circumstance. And so the question is, okay, "thou shalt not kill," what does that actually mean? How do we actually live that? And so there's whole chapters about that. It talks about accidentally killing someone. It talks about premeditated killing. It talks even about what happens if one of your animals kills someone, right? And so the laws of Moses is the breakdown for that society of how that law is interpreted in those days. All right? Which is why a lot of the laws of Moses we don't follow anymore. All right? Because they were specific for that time period. Now, that doesn't take away the fact that the foundational element of the laws are still accurate. All right? But we'll get into that. We'll get into that when we talk about the Ten Commandments and everything else beside that. But hopefully it'll help explain some of the laws that exist in there in the Old Testament. All right. Um, but that again just takes me back to this verse. Anytime we try to live this world with our own laws, especially when they go against God's laws, there's nothing wrong with having a law that you create as long as it agrees with God's laws, right? That's perfectly fine. Um, but the second you create a law that goes against God's laws, you're going to be in trouble. You're going to be in trouble. All right? And that's really the fall of Lucifer. So that's Satan. That's the beginning of Satan that I wanted to talk about today. So next week we'll talk about angels in general, the different types of angels. We'll explain Lucifer a little better, and then what their limitations are. For me, that's a big part of it. What can they do? What can't they do? And then we'll get into the original sin, Adam and Eve in the garden, things like that. There's lots to study, so we'll be here for as long as you guys put up with me. All
Yeah,
right.
no, I'm honestly loving this. I have a question, and maybe you're going to address it next week, but
Mm-hmm.
you mentioned a few times that, and I already knew this before, but I hadn't really thought about it, that Satan is one of two covering cherubs. So that implies there's like an
There's another one.
equivalent, that someone like is on par with him, no?
Name them. Who do you think?
Gabriel?
Gabriel. Everyone comes up with Gabriel. Possibility. Yeah, that's very much a possibility. He Gabriel is one of the few angels that we know by name in the Bible. Every other time it's just an angel. And then we'll talk about Michael as well, right? Michael is one of
Mhm.
those, the archangel, and what that means. It's possible. The Bible never says and never calls Gabriel a covering cherub, but he does appear quite a lot. He appears in Daniel. He appears in the birth of Jesus, or the story there with Mary and Joseph. So he does seem to be a popular angel that kind of pops up. So it's possible. It's possible.
So we don't know who this covering chair, like the second is. All we know is that
There
it is
seems to be two,
possible.
based on the Ark of the Covenant. It's two angels that
Yeah.
take that role. Yeah.
Which is just interesting because it makes it less forgiving for Satan to have done all that if someone else was in the exact same position and was
Someone
fine.
else. Well, and that's it. And he didn't sin, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah. I mean, it's one of those questions that's probably one that we'll have to wait until we get to heaven and say, like, listen, what happened? Like,
Mhm.
what exactly caused? What triggered? You know. Um, though at the end of the day, I mean, Adam and Eve, it makes more sense because there was a catalyst, right? Like there was an actual being who was trying to get them to sin. And same with the other angels, for instance, right? Lucifer, though, convinced himself, right? Um, it's weird. We don't know. We don't know exactly. Again, it gives us those little hints. We can speculate. But at the end of the day, all we know that is that he was perfect. God didn't create him flawed, right? If God had created him flawed, then it would be God's fault, right? You created Satan to become Satan. But everything that we read in the Bible actually goes against that. It's actually pointing towards the fact that no, he was perfect. And then, he chose to make that choice. Which, by the way, this is something for the future. But a lot of people ask me, when we get to heaven, right? Will we be able to sin again? Like, is it even possible? Is
Mm.
it going to be possible to sin, or is it going to be impossible to sin? Um, I'll answer right now, at least based on everything that I've read in the Bible. The possibility will always be there, but the promise of God is that it will never happen. All right. And Satan is actually one of those reasons why. Satan didn't have a tree of life, he didn't have to eat a fruit. Satan simply, one day, for some reason, chose to not follow God. That's really what sin is, right? You stop following God. Um, he had the same ability to choose that Adam and Eve have. Now, when we talk about Adam and Eve, one of the things that we'll talk about is for God to create a loving being, he has to give choice because love is only love if you choose it, right? God couldn't create someone that had no option but to love him, right? That's more like a robot. So Adam and Eve had to have been created with choice. Now, a lot of people say because the Bible says that we will never sin again, there will never be sin ever again. People have this idea that there's no ability to sin. It's going to be impossible to sin. The problem with that idea is, well, then he's just turning you into a robot again, or
Mhm.
he's turning you into a robot. Like he's taking away your ability to choose, which God will never do because he still wants us to choose to love him, right? But we'll get into that. There's a reason why the Bible says that we're all going to be priests in heaven. And part of that role is to, any other, every creature that's been created before us, they have the warning, right? Like they've looked at the earth and they're like, never, I'm never gonna step down there, right? I'm never gonna go in that direction. But the question is, well, what about every other creature or world that God is going to create in the future? That's where we come in, and this is where our story comes in. We're going to be the ones that will explain. Listen, this is what would happen if you made the wrong choice, the same way we did, and that's what's going to prevent sin from ever coming back again. Um, Now, what that actually means, I don't know. Whether it's just going to be us talking, or whether there's some sort of crazy heavenly virtual reality where we can actually take people and show them what the world is like. We have no idea. But it has to be powerful enough that no being will ever even consider. doing what we did
Mhm.
here at this world. But we'll get to that. When we get to that, when we talk about Adam
Yeah.
and Eve and all that good stuff. But yeah, any other questions? This is the time. It doesn't even have to be about this. It could be about anything.
Well, I still have that one question that I don't know if you've had time to think about it, but
Hmm.
just how, um, what was the actual question? Like
I know
God.
there was a question that I was like, I'll answer this next week, and then I completely forgot it. So let me actually
Yeah.
write it down before I forget again.
Let me just actually pull it up because I
Because this whole week I was like, somebody asked me something,
don't.
and I can't remember for the life of me.
Okay, so why was God allowed to destroy the earth in a flood because of sin? Like, how is that not cheating in the war against Satan?
Okay.
Like, how would this not have worked towards Satan's favor in his argument that God was controlling dictator? And then a similar question about Sodom and Gomorrah.
All right, I can give you just a top of my head answer, and then maybe some other day, because maybe we'll spend some time on the flood and actually go through that story. But I know before that, or the introduction to the flood story, is the idea that human beings were becoming so evil that even the few that were still with God were starting to be swayed. All right. That's where you get the sons of God were marrying the daughters of
Yeah.
men or whatever it is. Um, and so I think part of it was they had sped up the sin process so quickly, like they were just on fast forward, that if God didn't do something, um, the test would end early, and humanity would just kill itself. Like it was literally getting to that point where human beings were just so violent that nothing was being left alive. And so to keep the test going, he did a reset, right? Let me take a few, those that are still good, and restart it. And in fact, you get another reset at the Tower of Babel, which is connected to that story, right? Right after the flood, you have the Tower of Babel, which is where you get the whole thing with the languages,
Mhm.
which is again another block, another wall that God puts there to kind of slow humanity down. Like you guys are just you're sinning in fast forward because you're all united and you're doing stuff, and just making it worse. So let me create divisions within you so that you don't join your heads together and create like the atomic bomb early kind of a thing. So that's the top of my head answer. Uh, but I'm sure we'll study it. When we do, we'll do a night on just the flood, and we'll try to look in detail as to why that happens or why God does it. It is strange though. And that's why God even says like, listen, this was a one-off. Like I'm never gonna do this again because this was like the extreme, um, an extreme act. Another possible reason why it happened is the world before the flood and the world after the flood are drastically different. All right. Um, we're talking about like continental shifts and like just massive changes within the world. Again, when you look at it, all based on separating, right? Very similar to the Tower of Babel, creating divisions within humanity so that, they don't just repeat what happened before the flood. Um, this, what we're talking about here very much gets into the whole debate with evolution and how exactly the world is created. Um, and there's some things that you can think about, uh, which might be very new or strange to think about, but I'll throw it out there just to confuse you a little bit when we actually talk about
Okay.
the flood and so on. But yeah, the world pre-flood, very, very different than post-flood. And that's talking even from like a genetic level. There seems to be two drastic changes in the world. The first one is after sin, right? Because before sin, there is no death, right? And that includes animals, which means animals didn't eat animals. So what did a lion eat, right? What did a wolf eat? So there must have been some literally genetic changes. The Bible talks about, now flowers will have thorns, right, as a means of protection and so on. So there was some actual physical changes in plants and animals and people and so on, right? For instance, based on lions' teeth are designed to eat meat, right? Um, so what was a lion's teeth like before sin? Because it obviously didn't need that, right? So you can see how everything must have changed if you believe in the creation story, right?
Mhm.
And this is why I'm saying this is where evolution really, you kind of have to decide one way or the other. But if you accept the creation story, then there must have been a drastic change after sin, right? Within the next few generations, and then you get a second drastic change after the flood, where again the world is very much rearranged and changed.
Mhm.
And I'll just throw this out there just when we talk about it. Um, I don't know how much you are. I really like science, so I try to keep up with it in the news.
Yeah.
You've heard about Neanderthals, right? Neanderthals.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Neanderthals are genetically different from human beings. All right. Like they have their own genome. The weird thing is, all human beings have a certain percentage of Neanderthal in them. All right, very small in most cases, but some tribes in the world have more than others, which begs the question then, what in the world was a Neanderthal if we use the creation story, right?
Mhm.
How do we add that into what the Bible teaches us and stuff like that? And this is where that whole idea of the sons of God mixing with the daughters of men and things like that, um, it poses a few questions in terms of what exactly existed at the beginning there. What kind of beings did God create in the beginning? Um, and how did that influence human beings today? Um, I don't have the answers to it, but I'll just raise them up just to kind of make you think a little bit,
Mhm.
because it's interesting when you kind of try to mix what we know today with what the Bible teaches in terms of creation and that. Yeah.
That's interesting. I don't know if you watch anything by Walter Veith, but he has he has like a creation versus evolution
Mm.
series, and I've only seen the first couple of them, but they, from the scientific perspective, because he's like, I don't know, a
Yeah, he
zoologist
was
or
a
marine
scientist
biologist,
before. Yeah, yeah.
um, like talks about like from a geological perspective how like there is so much evidence of a worldwide flood, which I thought was super interesting. I showed it to my brother and he's like a scientist and he was like, not enough information. But I thought it was a lot of information.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, as a pastor, the conference makes me do these like education courses online thing. So I did a whole thing on like evolution and basically they talk about how science, you have to make a certain decision right from the beginning in terms of what you interpret and how you interpret things.
Mm-hmm.
And that very much shapes how you see evidence and how you see things, right?
Yeah.
But it's really interesting. There's a lot of things. What I liked about the videos that I watched, the educational stuff, is they come out right at the beginning and they say, listen, there's a few things that we absolutely don't understand, right? But there's other things that we can explain. And then there's things that we recognize that evolutionists can't explain. So it kind of goes both ways, right? Both
Mm-hmm.
have these positives and kind of these mysteries that they
Yeah.
can't explain. But yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
It's above my head most of the time because once they start using like those, scientific words. I'm like, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
But I try to get as much as I can out of it.
Mhm.
Any other questions? All right, we'll wrap it up here. We'll pray. Let me stop recording. You got a question, Bianca? You can ask it if you want.
I did, but I was going to wait, but I can ask it now.